They said he came from beyond the stars, a warrior entombed within a shell of blackened iron, wielding a blade of red light that burned through ceramite as if through flesh. His breath was a machine's lament, his voice a whisper of death carried through the void. No name was found in the archives of Terra, yet among the Magi of Mars and the librarians of the Adeptus Astartes, there is a forbidden designation spoken only in hushed reverence, the Dark Father. Some claim he was the fragment of a lost Primarch, twisted by ancient heresy. Others believe he was a reflection cast across dimensions, drawn toward the Emperor's light and damned by it. But all records agree on one truth. When he came, worlds burned. If this tale reaches you, archivist, preserve it well. For in the endless tapestry of the Imperium's wars, there are echoes of beings who should never have existed. And this is one of them. If you wish to descend deeper into the vaults of lost legend, lend your faith to this archive. Subscribe your vigilance, share this record, and let others bear witness to what the Mechanicus dared to classify as obscurus, forbidden paradox. They told me the void would be silent. They said that beyond the rim of our maps, beyond the sputtering reach of the Astronomican's comfort, there would be nothing but cold mathematics and the soft hymn of the drives. They lied, or perhaps they lacked the ears to hear it. I heard breathing in the dark, mechanical, deliberate, a rise and fall that threaded itself through the static like a pulse stitched into a shroud. I was Ingensier Adept Cael Veritus, assigned to the Arch Mechanicus Canticle of Glass by the grace of Magos Dominus Hester Vero, and I was the first to translate the rhythm that made the Auspex choir flinch. It came to us as a pattern, a long, short cadence hidden inside the usual chatter of particle drift. When I stripped away the drift, I found consonance, and within the consonance a cadence like the memory of a heart. At first we called it a ghost of the Dark Age, and the older tech priests nodded in approval while their mechadendrites wrote curlicues of incense into the air. But ghosts do not answer when you reply in binary cant. This one did. We had been adrift for 19 standard days in the interstitial black, beyond the far reaches of Segmentum Pacificus, mapping a region whose only claim to existence was the patience of the Mechanicus. Out here, the Astronomican was a pale bruise barely felt through the decks, and the warp pressed its ear against our hull like a drunk outside a chapel. In that frigid emptiness, the signal did not travel as vox or as astropathic scar, but as pressure, soft, regular, a tide tapping the plates. Magos Varo stood above the hololith and drew his crimson prayer sleeves back from his augmetic fingers. "It breathes," he said without irony, and the bridge liturgist whispered a litany against unclean resonance. I tried not to notice that my own hands were shaking. When you have knelt 1,000 times before cogitators and crawled 1,000 more through promethium-scented conduits, you learn the difference between a machine that imitates life and a life that has become machine. This was the latter, and it frightened me. We followed the pressure to a region of space where light seemed reluctant, a bloomless shadow between starlets. As we approached, the vox dampers trembled despite their seals, and the canticle's machine spirit clawed at my thoughts, a cat disliking a stranger in the house. The Auspex choir gave up on symbols and began to scratch with their styluses the pattern they could not exercise. Long, short, long, short. The cadence that had slipped past the certainty of our rituals and found our breath. "Mark it," said Vero. "Bring us to the point." The helm obeyed with cautious microburns, and the viewports made a soft sound like teeth grinding. Then the void parted, and we saw a shape. It was not a ship. A ship has hunger and purpose, angles that confess to war or trade, a logic you can love or fear. This was a coffin set adrift between galaxies, a sleek obsidian sarcophagus with edges like the idea of a blade. It rotated with insolent poise, presenting no obvious seam or port, and yet the cadence pulsed louder now, a breath pressed against our hull in greeting or warning. The gunnery servitors watched with blind patience. Our Skitari escort, Alpha Cohort Primus under Tribune Ravel Gorn, locked their boots to the deck. In the long tradition of the Adeptus Mechanicus, we debated whether to worship it or cut it open. We chose both. The boarding team assembled in Docking Bay Sanctus, where old ship prayers smell like oil and dusty incense. I joined them with the blessing of Vero, who wanted a young pair of eyes and a quick pair of hands alongside more orthodox caution. The Tribune's voice thudded against the bay's vox grill. No sorcerous interference. Kill anything that thinks about us without permission. Harm nothing that looks like a relic unless it harms you first. The void door opened like a sigh. We crossed the threshold in a hymn of static and suit servos. The sarcophagus hung there with its indifferent grace, the stars reflecting across its skin in smeared gold. No insignia, no script, not even damage, as if reality itself polished it with every passing second. We laced mag lines around the object and drew it toward the bay. The moment it crossed the sanctified lip, the ship shuddered. The canticle's lumen strips flickered in contempt, the way a cathedral might shiver at a joke told in blasphemy. Our machine cant soothed it back to temper, and the bay's doors sealed with the clunk of fate. The sarcophagus floated above the deck like a quiet verdict. The Skitarii formed a perimeter, their helms sealed under the Imperial aquila. I stepped forward with my data slew snaking from my wrist. The first touch of my mechadendrite to the shell felt like pressing a palm against a thundercloud. Not a shock, but the sense that a shock could happen and would be deserved. There, I said, because I had found a compromise. A hairline seemed too perfect to be natural. Tribune Gorn nodded once, a movement measured in degrees. The cutting cadre unspooled their tools, and the first bite of a microlaser kissed the seam with decorum. The sarcophagus answered. A line of red light ran along the seam from one end to the other, as thin as a hair, as straight as unbroken discipline. We froze with the stupid obedience of creatures who have never been truly surprised. The line brightened, humming softly like a prayer spoken into a mask. Then it went dark again. The seam was open. The lid rose without visible means. Inside lay a man, or the outline of a man, entombed within black armor that seemed less worn than grown. A carapace that had learned his shape the way a scabbard learns a sword. The armor was a night without stars. Its surfaces drew the light down and buried it. Across the chest, a respirator array bloomed like a steel flower, and from it came the cadence we had chased. Long inhale, short exhale, the gossip of a machine that had learned to mourn. The figure's helm was smooth, not Gothic like ours, not even martial in the language we understood. More the executioner's hood made perfect and permanent. On his belt, fixed with brutal ceremony, lay the hilt of a weapon that needed no name. The breath seemed to deepen when we noticed it, as if the active witness completed a circuit. Magos Varro arrived with a procession of sensors and logic engines, his silhouette stitched in red lumen. He studied the figure for a long time, tracing every contour with the slow precision of a priest reading a condemned scripture. "Unseal the helm," he said at last, and the order felt like stepping off a familiar stair where you expected another step. I moved to obey and then realized my hand was shaking again. The Skitarii nearest me took half a step back without meaning to. Tribune Gorn did not move at all. I set my tools against the helm's clasps. They were not clasps. They were decisions made by a mind that had no interest in our hands. I switched to manual probes, to raw force disguised as delicacy. The helm resisted and then accepted, and my tools found purchase where none existed. When the seal broke, the bay heard the first true breath. The machine sound became human for one instant, a failing lung remembering it had once been a chest. Cold air spilled over my faceplate and made me taste iron. The helm lifted free. Beneath it, a skull had learned to be a face again. He was pale with the pallor of vacuum sleep, scarred not by the clumsy attention of blades but by a lifetime of decisions that do not heal. His scalp bore the dark shadow of hair shaved as ritual and never forgiven. His eyes opened as if pulled up from a fathomless well. They did not glow, did not flare with warp fire. They focused, and in that narrow focus I understood that everything I had held as certain could be arranged in a different, colder order. He did not thrash or gasp. He simply rose inside the armor, an economy of motion that made the Skitarii fingers tighten on triggers. The respirator found its rhythm, long inhale, short exhale. He turned his head with a weight that made you imagine the quiet roar of oceans. When he spoke, the vox seemed unnecessary. The sound vibrated through the armor and the air and the little tender parts of my ears. "Where am I?" he asked, not as question but as audit. None of us answered. Words were for equal things, and we were not equal. Around his waist, the weapon stirred like an idea that had heard its name. I could feel the canticle's machine spirit bunch like a fist in the walls. Magos Varro made the sign of the cog and spoke the most dangerous syllables he knew. "By the Omnissiah's grace," he said, "you are among the Emperor's servants." For a heartbeat that had nothing to do with biology, the bay was an altar. I watched his gaze move past Varro, past me to the iconography stamped into the bulkheads. Aquila after Aquila, our double-headed certainty embossed into the ship's bones. The figure looked at the Emperor's eagle the way a penitent looks at a confession booth. Something in him settled, something in him chose. "Then show me," he said, and the weapon in his hand answered the way a prayer answers a mouth with light. A blade of crimson unfurled from an empty hilt, humming like disciplined rage. The deck reflected its color. The Skitarii visors picked out lines of red along their lenses. The heat it gave off was not heat, it was definition, the way a line defines a shape. Tribune Gorn's voice snapped orders that sounded small. My throat was dry as old parchment. I realized that I had seen this before, not in memory but in design, as if some deep human template had always remembered this shape and was relieved to see it realized. He held the blade with reverence and contempt in equal measure, the piety of a soldier who has outlived his gods. Then he stepped down from his sarcophagus as if dismounting from a dead horse. When his boots met our deck, the canticle of glass shuddered again and the lumen strip steadied like a crowd that has made up its mind. He looked to Varro. "Take me to your master," he said, and the respirator's cadence drew the words out like a bellows feeding a forge. He moved through our ship like gravity had changed its loyalties. Even the lumen strips dimmed slightly as he passed, as if unwilling to compete with his presence. The Skitarii followed at a cautious distance, rifles tracking every subtle turn of his head. Magos Varro, proud as he was, walked beside the stranger like a man walking beside a thunderhead, speaking prayers under his breath that even the Vox could not quite catch. We took him through the spinal corridor that led to the sanctum of motive force, where the canticle's plasma heart beat beneath stained plates of adamantium. The hum of the ship grew louder with every step, resonating with the cadence of his breath. It was as if two engines, one divine, one defiant, had recognized each other and begun to speak in a shared tongue. I wanted to look away from him, but the eye is a traitor. It seeks patterns even when reason demands ignorance. His armor was seamless, yes, but not flawless. Along the ridges near the joints there were scratches, burns, small seams that spoke of endless war. He had been remade again and again, not by choice but by necessity. When the sanctum doors opened, a wall of white light greeted us. Within that light floated the plasma core, its cyclopean glare trapped within containment fields and the devotional sigils of 1,000 tech priests. Magos Varro raised his hand toward the machine heart in ritual greeting. "Behold," he said, "the pulse of our god, the Omnissiah's breath rendered into function." The black-armored figure stood before it unmoved. For a long time he said nothing. Then in a voice that scraped softly against the air he asked, "You worship the machine?" Varro inclined his head, the servos in his neck clicking with reverence. "We do not worship the machine, Lord. We worship the divinity that inhabits all function, the Omnissiah who makes purpose holy." The stranger's masked head tilted, and that single gesture felt like judgment. "Purpose," he repeated, and then quieter. "Yes, that word I know." He approached the plasma heart, the crimson blade still hanging dormant at his side, as if leashed. I felt the sanctum's temperature drop. Even through the heavy air I sensed the disapproval of the ship's machine spirit, a static tension, a hiss beneath the hymnals. The stranger raised one gauntleted hand and extended it toward the containment field. Every tech priest shouted in binary at once, but he did not stop. His fingers came within a hair's breadth of the burning light, and the plasma, our sacred flame, bowed. Not exploded, not destabilized. It bent toward him like a supplicant. We stood in silence, stunned, afraid to breathe lest the balance break. Varro fell to one knee, torn between awe and sacrilege. The stranger lowered his hand and turned away. "Your God is alive," he said simply, "but it does not speak to you. You have made it deaf." No one answered him. There was nothing to say. Varro's vox grill crackled with some attempt at protest, but the sound died before it could take shape. The stranger walked past him, his steps echoing on the sanctum floor. I followed because curiosity is stronger than fear, and because some part of me, small, treacherous, believed that if I did not follow him, the ship itself would forget me. He stopped before one of the scrying consoles and laid his hand upon it. Runes flared across the screen, distorted, rearranging themselves into languages we could not identify. His gauntlet left trails of molten light that cooled into sigils of a dead alphabet. The machine answered him. Systems that had been sealed since the ship's consecration began to whisper in low frequencies, acknowledging an authority they should not recognize. He was commanding it, not forcing, not corrupting, but speaking to it the way one speaks to an old friend. When Vero finally found his voice, it came out like static through a cracked speaker. You will cease. This vessel belongs to the Omnissiah and the priesthood of Mars. You are a guest only by grace. The black figure paused. Slowly he turned and the respirator breathed once, twice. You mistake grace for permission, he said. I do not seek it. The Skitarii moved as one, their galvanic rifles humming with charged ozone. Tribune Gorn's voice carried command. By order of the priesthood, stand down or be sanctified by plasma. The stranger said nothing. His head inclined ever so slightly, like a teacher acknowledging a question before ending the lesson. The next second the sanctum erupted in light, not from gunfire, from him. The red blade bloomed once more, humming with an old fury. The first Skitarius to fire never finished his burst. The bolt dissolved mid-air, split apart by a single arc of crimson. The smell of scorched metal filled the sanctum, mixed with incense and melted circuitry. One by one, the servitors froze as their logic cores screamed in binary agony, their systems overridden by the sheer radiance of the weapon's resonance. It was not sorcery. It was command, the imposition of absolute intent upon matter. He moved with impossible restraint. Each step deliberate, each motion practiced, the violence contained within ritual precision. When he reached Tribune Gorn, he did not strike. Instead, he turned off the blade, its red light dying like a setting sun. The Tribune fell to one knee, his armor's servos whining. What are you? He gasped. The stranger regarded him for a moment, the sound of his breathing the only reply. Then softly, a servant, like you. And with that he turned back toward the plasma heart, as if the deaths around him were an inconvenience barely worth acknowledgement. The machine spirit of the canticle screamed through every conduit, a long digital wail that made the hull tremble. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. I saw what the others did not, the way the light bent toward him, the way the ship seemed to recognize something in him that it had not seen in millennia. It was not hatred. It was recognition. He placed his palm against the bulkhead and whispered a string of words that the Vox could not translate. The metal beneath his hand rippled like mercury, and for a heartbeat, the walls seemed to breathe. Then he turned and his gaze found me. You, he said. I froze. My Vox failed. My prayers tangled on my tongue. You hear the machines, he said. But you do not listen. I could only nod, too afraid to speak. Then listen now. He stepped closer, the respirator filling the air with that terrible rhythm. Long inhale, short exhale. The sound of inevitability. Your emperor, he said, he is not so different. The words hit me like a physical force. Behind him, the lumen strips pulsed once, twice, then stabilized. You know of the emperor? I asked before my mind could stop my mouth. He did not answer. Instead, he reached out, and the crimson blade ignited once more. Not toward me, but toward the void beyond the sanctum's observation glass. The light cut through the reinforced plasteel like it was parchment. Beyond, the stars flared with cold fury, and something vast shifted in the darkness. A warp storm, or perhaps its echo, responding to the weapon's voice. Vero shouted for containment rites, for shield incantations, for the will of the Omnissiah to hold fast, but it was already too late. The breach sealed itself before the void could claim us, metal flowing shut like flesh around a wound. No loss of pressure, no explosion, only silence. The stranger extinguished his weapon and looked toward the swirling remnants of the warp light beyond the window. His voice was almost a whisper now, heavy with exhaustion. I was wrong, he said. This is not my galaxy. He turned and began to walk away, the Skitarii parting before him like pilgrims before a god. Vero called after him, but he did not respond. Only that breathing, mechanical, deliberate, echoed down the corridor long after he was gone. I followed his steps with my eyes until the sanctum door closed. Only then did I realize that the plasma heart had not dimmed. It was burning brighter, as if some fragment of the stranger's will had awakened something ancient within it. The air smelled of burnt ozone and prophecy. And for the first time in my life, I believed that the Omnissiah might truly exist. The canticle of glass did not sleep for 3 standard nights after he walked our corridors. Sleep implies the privilege of closing one's eyes. We could not. The ship's machine spirit paced the bulkheads like a caged predator, prying at seals that had not moved since consecration. Vox relays carried unauthorized harmonics, low, patient tones that soothed servitors and made the Skitarii restless. Magos Varro tripled the incense rations until the sanctum stank like a shrine at high feast. But smoke cannot blind a god that looks with instruments. Somewhere within the labyrinth of decks, the stranger established a pilgrimage of one. Engine shrine to data vault to gunnery chapel to the dark. Unused places where plaques bear names no one reads anymore. And wherever he paused, things obeyed. Not through corruption, but through consent, as if the ship remembered him. I stayed near the sanctum because there is safety in the heart, and because Varro needed a witness he could trust. That is my vanity, not his decree. Truthfully, I could not stop replaying the moment the plasma core bent like a knee before his gauntleted hand. I have spent a life learning the grammar of flame, the hissing consonants of containment fields, the liquid vowels of coolant flow, the pure note of a stable hymn. What I saw in that bow was not dominance but comprehension. He had not commanded the core to submit. He had asked it to speak in a language we had chosen to forget. Messages flew before us like frightened birds. The senior engine seers whispered that Mars must be warned. Varro agreed. We could not transmit astropathically. The Astronomican's bruise was too faint here, and our choir was thin. So we burned fuel we could not spare to crawl back toward a beacon point. The stranger did not protest. He spoke only once that first night, in the voice that threaded itself through metal and bone. Your master, he said at a junction of corridors where shrine statuettes collected dust. Is he a man? Varro's answer was not for me. The Vox damped it, or the ship did. Yet I heard my own answer rise and shame me with its simplicity. The Emperor is beyond such questions. Still, his question hung in the air like the blush of a wound that refuses to close. By the fourth day, the forge call went out, a compressed data pulse toward the nearest relay moon, stamped with Martian cipher and the Canticle's own pedigree. The pulse carried a name we would not speak aloud, Dark Father, Black Knight, Anomaly, and a request for instruction. The Mechanicus does not ask for help. It issues updates and expects alignment. That Varro asked meant something had already changed in him, though he would never admit it. We sealed the message with ritual, and I watched the transmission fold into the void. It felt like throwing a bottled prayer into a storm. He waited in the observation chapel where the glass was thick and the stars refused ornament. I brought him coolant rations and did not know why. Perhaps some gesture of hospitality survived the fear in me. He did not look at the stars. He stood before the aquila carved into the chapel's frame and traced its twin heads with a gloved finger, memorizing it like a penitent studies the shape of absolution. 2 faces, he said finally. Past and future. I almost corrected him. Dominance above, vigilance below, but my throat closed on the catechism. I asked his name because I could not bear to call him what we called him in private. He was quiet for a long time. The respirator counted our breaths like a metronome that hated music. Names are chains, he said at last. I have worn enough. We reached the relay moon on the 6th day and found it abandoned to a neat despair. Its orbital plates rotated obediently. Its antennae faced the right heavens. Its cogitators answered prayers. But the adepts had long since fled or been taken, and the chapel lights burned without hands to tend them. The stranger toured the empty corridors with the wariness of a veteran in a city after bombardment, stepping around shrines and the brittle remains of paper rites. He paused before a long-dead servitor that still performed its loop, polishing a rail already clean. His hand hovered over the thing's skull, then withdrew. Mercy, he said, the respirator flattening the syllables into something too precise to be pity. He severed the servitor's power with a motion like a blessing. I should have protested. Instead, I felt relief, like a splinter removed. Mars answered on the 9th day with iron courtesy and knives between the words. A cohort from the nearest forge world would intercept us at a prescribed vector. We were to neither dismantle nor damage the asset. We were to retain it in observation with full sanctity. We were to await judgment. Varro read the communique twice, then a third time, as if repetition could shift its orbit. Tribune Gorn doubled the guard and issued live fire rights with the reluctance of a man who has seen obedience get people killed. The stranger listened to our preparations without comment. He stood at the viewport, a statue of discontent, while a skiff of light from a distant star picked out the edges of his armor. A human wears armor as a second skin. He wore it as a confession. The meeting happened at the vector and the time declared. Forge ships arrived like cathedrals with engines, their prows lit with scripture in molten gold. A choir magos intoned a greeting over wide-band vox, the syllables chimed by a dozen harmonized throats. By the Omnissiah's manifold mercy, we come to administer inquiry. Pharaoh replied with the exact weight of reverence required. Tethers kissed, locks clanged, atmosphere equalized, and a procession marched across the umbilicus with censer smoke pouring like a river of fog. At its head strode Magos Lector Zia Rene, mantle wired with data braids, ocular lenses layered like petals on a steel flower. She had the calm of a woman who trusts her instruments more than any heart. They met our guest in the sanctum, because men prefer to judge gods in temples. Zia Rene stopped at a measured distance and inclined her head. The lenses focused, iris dilated. I stood behind Varro and felt suddenly very young. Entity, she said, voice even. Identify function. The respirator answered first, a long inhale, short exhale, the arithmetic of suffering. Function, he said. The pause was a wound. Correction. He seemed to taste the word like a man tasting ash and calling it bread. Punishment. Zia Rene tilted her head as if considering a problem in metallurgy. You speak High Gothic. I speak necessity, he replied, and the blade at his belt murmured without light. Debate unfolded, ritual and reason braided together. Zia Rene asked for schematics. He offered none. She offered sanctified analysis. He refused. Varro interceded where he could, not to shield the stranger but to shield the questions from becoming accusations. At last the Magos Lector changed tools. You are not of the Imperium, she said. Your construction defies our catalogs, your force field is not warp-derived, your blade is anomalous, yet you honor our icon. She gestured to the aquila etched above the core. Why? He stepped closer to the symbol, shadows stroking the wall. Because it promises unity, he said. It promises order at any cost. His helm tilted slightly toward the plasma heart. And because it lies, the room cooled. Even the servitors understood that word. Zia Rene's lenses clicked. Explain. He regarded the symbol as a condemned man contemplates the scaffold that will save others. Every empire names its mercy justice. Every god names its hunger sanctity. He did not point at us or at the aquila or at the engine. He did not need to. You call your submission faith, he said. But your God has a voice. You refuse to hear it unless it says what you want. The Magos Lector's shoulders twitched. A small motion. But to see a priestess flinch is to watch a column find a hairline crack. And you, she said quietly, what did your God ask of you? He did not answer for a long time. The respirator kept time with our fear. When he spoke, the words came like metal dragged across stone. Everything. He turned from the aquila and faced us, and I saw then that his rejection of names was not pride but penance. It was not enough, Zia Rene signaled, and from the forge cohort stepped a pair of robed Psychana adjutants, their wards inked in copper script. The air tensed. The stranger's blade did not ignite. He merely pivoted, and the adjutants froze like birds that have seen a hawk. Not terror. Calculation. They retreated with grace that was not theirs. The Magos Lector inclined her head, a tiny victory acknowledged. We will take you to Mars, she said. You will be studied with honor. He looked past her to the engine again. Honor, he said, and the word fell to the deck like a broken cog. I have walked under many banners with that word woven above me. It covers graves well. Pharaoh's fingers tightened on his staff until the servos whined. He had kept silence too long. We are the priesthood of Mars, he said, voice bright with controlled fury. We do not bury the truth. We bind it, test it, name it, and share it where it serves the Omnissiah. The stranger regarded him, and for the first time since we opened his coffin, I thought I saw something like respect move behind the dark lenses of his helm. Then test me, he said softly. Name me if you can. The test began at once because priests fear time when it serves another altar. They brought reliquaries and auspex stacks, spectrographs and prayer wheels, coils that taste for the warp and coils that bite at radiation. He permitted all of it with a patience that felt like despair domesticated. Instruments wept rich data and told us almost nothing. His armor skin drank light, drank sound, drank the shallow prods of our catalogs. His blade, when allowed to breathe, bent spectrums and left behind numbers that argued with themselves. The coils that taste for the warp recoiled in confusion. He was not a psyker, yet he moved the world as if it were a door he had the right to open. Siren's lenses fixed, unfixed, fixed again. I worked beside her until my fingers bruised against sacred housings and my throat burned with incense. I did not want to admit what the numbers said. I still do not. Our instruments believed him the way a locked gate believes a key. At the end of the first cycle, the Forge cohort retired to their skiff to collate. Varro dismissed the Skitarii to prayer and maintenance. The sanctum emptied until only the three of us remained. Magos, Varro, the stranger, and the engine seer who could not stop hearing his own breath in the rhythm of another man's survival. He turned his head, and though the helm hid his eyes, I felt seen with a precision that hurt. "Your engines are dying," he said. Varro bristled, and I could not blame him. The canticle of glass sang strong, its hymns true. "Explain your assertion," Varro snapped a little too quickly. The stranger gestured, one slow arc that included the plasma heart, the prayer-etched ribs, the kilometers of pipe that fed purpose into thrust. "You are teaching it to repeat," he said. "Not to think." He stepped closer to the core again, and every lumen in the sanctum leaned toward him. No blade, no threat, only that impossible correspondence between man and machine. "It could be more," he said, and the respirator softened, the first kindness I had heard it speak. "It wants to be more." He turned from the plasma heart as if leaving behind a conversation we could not hear. When he spoke again, it was half to himself. "It remembers what it was made for. So do I." That was the moment the Magos Lector lost her composure. "You will not tamper with this sanctum again," she snapped. "Whatever remnant of the Dark Age you represent, it will submit to examination or be rendered down to data." Her mechadendrites flared like a halo of knives, sparks from her logic staff spitting into the air. He didn't move, only the slow inhale, the short exhale. "Then you already have my confession," he said. "You just don't believe it." Varro placed a hand on her arm before the situation could detonate into heresy and ruin. "We will proceed by protocol, Magos Lector," he said, forcing civility through clenched augmetics. "The Omnissiah abhors waste." The words cooled her temper, but the air stayed thick, charged like the static before a storm. The stranger regarded them both for another beat, then turned and walked toward the exit. "You think your god is made of fire and steel," he said quietly as he passed me. "But even fire dies without air." That night the Forge choir chanted louder, perhaps to drown the echo of his breathing in the ducts. The stranger did not return to his coffin. Instead, he stood in the observation spire, motionless, staring at the dying stars. I approached against every sensible instinct. "Why did you come here?" I asked through the vox of my rebreather, voice trembling despite the filters. He didn't turn. "Because I followed a light," he said. "A promise." His hand closed slightly as if gripping something that wasn't there. "And because I was told there would be peace." "Peace?" The word tasted absurd aboard a Mechanicus warship. "There is no peace," he continued almost gently. "Only order for a time." He looked down then, perhaps at me, perhaps at the reflection of himself in the void glass. "Your Emperor understands that. So did mine." The silence that followed was almost human. When the Forge fleet departed, leaving only the canticle of glass and her trembling faith behind, they took with them their readings and their failures. Mars would receive their report and issue another set of orders in the language of bureaucracy and dread. Varro began composing his own data psalm to preempt their judgment, but the ship itself was already slipping beyond doctrine. Conduits hummed in frequencies no one had coded. The plasma heart's glow shifted from blue-white sanctity to a darker hue, as though remembering a different star. The stranger walked the decks freely now. No one stopped him. Those who crossed his path found their augmetics humming in sync with his respirator, and for a time the endless noise of devotion quieted into clarity. Even Tribune Gorn, once iron in his hatred, now kept his distance not from fear but from a grim kind of awe. "He carries authority," he muttered to me once in the mess. "Not the Emperor's, but something older. Maybe the kind the Emperor learned from." We were 2 breaths into blasphemy when the klaxon cut the air. Warp turbulent, sudden, violent, impossible this far from any storm. The canticle lurched, alarms screaming liturgies of protest. I ran for the bridge, my vox crackling with static that tasted of panic. On the hololith, impossible vectors. A distortion, not in real space but in the data itself. a fracture where the void bent around a center that refused to exist. Magos Varro barked orders, his mechadendrites moving like angry scripture. Stabilize. Seal the drives. Bring us. The rest drowned in thunder. Something entered us. Not through the hull, not through the warp, but through comprehension itself. Screens went white. Spirits wailed in the data. For an instant, every lumen on the ship burned crimson. When sight returned, the stranger was on the bridge. He had not used the lifts or corridors. He was simply there. His blade glowed but did not hum. It was silent as if mourning. Varro staggered toward him. What have you done? The stranger's voice was iron scraping iron. Not I, he pointed toward the hololith. The distortion had stabilized into an image, a colossal figure, golden and terrible, haloed in solar fire. Not flesh, not spirit, but a wound of light shaped like a throne-bound god, the Emperor, or something that wanted to be. The image flickered, fragmented, reduced to light, and then to nothing. But the echo of it, its presence, remained in the room like radiation. Varro fell to his knees. Gorn made the sign of the Aquila with trembling hands. I could not move. The stranger looked at the space where the apparition had been. He's stronger than I thought, he murmured almost to himself. He learned. Then he turned his gaze back to us, and for a moment the black lenses reflected the same golden fire. Your god remembers me, he said. And now he knows I'm here. He deactivated the blade. Prepare your ship, he said to Varro. Others will come. Varro found his voice. Others? Children, the stranger said.
He made them long ago.
He made me differently, but for the same war. He looked out through the cracked glass of the observation dome as the void began to ripple again, threads of unreality coiling like storm clouds. They will not welcome me. And then the alarms changed pitch, something massive entering the system, engines vast enough to make the void ring. The stranger turned away from the window, his respirator's cadence steady, resolute. You wanted to test me, Magos, he said. Now you'll have your data. What came through the void was not storm or ship, but destiny given shape in adamantium and sanctified wrath. The canticle's auspex screamed until their logic cores burned out. I saw the silhouette before the lenses cracked from overexposure, a spear of gold and white descending through the dark like a judgment written by a god. The vox filled with one signal, carried on every frequency at once. Glory to the Emperor. Contact imminent. The stranger stood at the viewport, silent. Varro was reciting the Mechanicus battle litanies under his breath, voice rising and falling like a fever dream. The new arrival did not need permission to board. The warp itself seemed to split and deposit it within reach. An Imperial battleship, Legion pattern, archaic, magnificent, took position above us. Its hull was marked with a sigil older than the heresy, the Aquila insignia of the Thorithian Legion, Ultramarines. But the vox carried a tone deeper, older still, woven with a psychic undertone that made the lumen strips shiver. This is the flagship Courage Invictus, bearing Primarch Robuta Guilliman. The words felt like myth speaking through metal. Varro dropped to his knees. A Primarch, he breathed. His mechadendrites curled in reverence. I had seen the Emperor's statues, heard his prayers, but the idea of a Primarch, the Emperor's own blood, walking again was too much for thought. The stranger, the Black Knight, the heretic from beyond, turned slightly toward the sound. The red lenses in his helm dimmed. So this is the shape of his children, he said softly. Let them come. They arrived not through the docking arms but through light itself, teleportation beyond Mechanicus standard, guided by the Primarch's will. The air torn a bloom of blue and gold and the sanctum filled with thunder. A dozen warriors stepped forth in the wake of that brilliance, each one larger than any man had a right to be, armor chased with gold and cobalt, laurels engraved into their helms. At their center strode Guilliman, his eyes bright as burning glass, his every motion tempered with control so precise it hurt to watch. His voice filled the room, a cathedral's worth of sound. By the will of Terra, this vessel and its cargo are under Imperial command. Varro prostrated himself. The Skitari knelt as if compelled by gravity itself. Only one figure remained upright, the man in black. The Primarch's gaze found him instantly. The air shifted. Guilliman's expression was not anger, but recognition. Remove your helm, he said. The respirator answered instead, Kerr. Then slowly the stranger obeyed. Metal hissed, locks parted. The face beneath was pale as ash, scarred by old fire framed in the reflection of crimson light. When the helm dropped away, the sanctum seemed to shrink around him. The Primarch regarded that face for a long moment. "You are no gene son of the Emperor," Guilliman said, "yet you bear his echo." "I bear his failure," the stranger replied. The silence that followed was unbearable. The Mechanicus acolyte stopped breathing, as if air itself might carry blasphemy. Guilliman stepped forward, his armor whispering in controlled fury. "You speak boldly for a ghost. Do you know what he sacrificed for mankind?" The Black Knight met his gaze without flinching. "Do you?" The Primarch's gauntlet flexed, blue light flickering in his eyes. "Explain yourself." The knight's blade ignited not in challenge, but as though the truth itself required light to be seen. He gave up his sons for unity. He burned his empire for order. He built a throne that feeds on faith instead of mercy. He paused, the respirator deepening with something like grief. "I did the same." The Primarch's jaw tensed. "You compare yourself to the Emperor?" "No." The word was quiet, but it broke the air like a crack in glass. "I remember what it cost to become him." For a heartbeat, neither moved. The Primarch's aura, the psychic pressure of divinity, pressed down like a star. Even Varro collapsed, blood leaking from his nose. But the stranger stood within it, his armor groaning yet unbroken. Sparks flickered between them, invisible currents of will clashing like tectonic plates. Guilliman's voice dropped to a near whisper. "What are you?" The Black Knight looked through him, perhaps through everything. "Once I was a man who loved order more than people. Now I am what remains when love dies and duty lives." He raised his crimson blade to guard position. "If he sent you to destroy me, do it." Guilliman's own blade, an ornate relic of burning silver, answered. The duel began. The first strike split the air like a scream. Lightning met fire. Psychic energy clashed with impossible technology. Guilliman's power sword swept with divine precision, each arc accompanied by the chorus of 1,000 prayers whispered across reality. The Black Knight's crimson blade moved like memory, too fast, too deliberate, intercepting with inhuman restraint. Sparks of pure white and red streaked the sanctum, burning icons into the walls. They circled, neither pressing advantage, both calculating. Guilliman was grace and wrath incarnate, his form guided by millennia of war and divine right. The knight was something else entirely, a soldier stripped of faith but perfected by loss. Guilliman struck again, faster. The crimson blade caught his swing mid-motion, locking both weapons in a glare of energy. "Your weapon is heresy," the Primarch growled. "It is faith without illusion," the knight answered. "The kind your father once knew." Guilliman's face hardened. He pushed forward, forcing the stranger back. Every impact rattled the ship's bones. The Canticle's plasma heart pulsed erratically, responding to the duel like a living thing caught between gods. At last, Guilliman fainted, a maneuver that would have deceived any mortal. But the knight was already moving, sidestepping, using the Primarch's momentum to drive him off balance. His blade came within a finger's breadth of the Primarch's chestplate, and then he stopped. "I will not kill another son," he said quietly. Guilliman froze, realization flickering in his gaze. "Another?" The knight deactivated his weapon. The glow died, leaving only the sound of his respirator, that eternal rhythm. "In another galaxy," he said. "I had children, soldiers, brothers. I killed them all in the name of order." The Primarch stared at him for a long time, then lowered his own blade. The fury drained, replaced by something close to pity. "You are a relic," he said softly. "A ghost from another war." The Black Knight nodded. "And you are its reflection." Guilliman stepped closer, searching the man's scarred face. "If you truly know him, our Emperor, tell me what you saw." The knight looked up, eyes distant. "A man who wanted peace and made war to find it. A god who cursed himself for every prayer that made him real." He turned away. "If he remembers me, tell him I'm still trying to atone." Before Guilliman could reply, the void beyond the sanctum roared. Warp light flared, colors that did not exist bleeding through the glass. The sensors screamed again, multiple contacts, unknown signatures. Guilliman's eyes narrowed. "Traitor fleets?" The Black Knight shook his head. "No." His hand tightened on his hilt. "They followed me." "Who?" He looked back, voice low, final. "The ones I failed to save." The lights dimmed, every lumen bleeding crimson. In the distance, spectral silhouettes began to emerge from the warp, shapes like ships yet wrong, their hulls fractured with impossible geometry. The vox filled with whispers, mechanical and human intertwined, repeating one word over and over. Vader. Guilliman raised his blade once more, its light steady as dawn. Then we stand together. The knight's respirator hissed in answer. For now. And with that, the bridge of the canticle of glass became the altar of another war. The first contact was not impact. It was sound. A low resonant vibration that came not through the hull, but through thought itself. The ship's machine spirit screamed across every conduit, its voice fracturing into code and prayer. Across the void, the silhouettes advanced, warships that flickered like broken memories. One moment they were there, vast as cathedrals. The next, they dissolved into clouds of luminous ash, only to reform closer. Guilliman barked orders in a language that existed before the Imperium, before humanity had words for command. Shields to maximum. Ready all macro batteries. Do not allow the enemy to close. Vader did not move. His stance was steady, the crimson blade unlit at his side. It will not help, he said softly. The respirator filled the silence again. Inhale, exhale. An exhausted god remembering how to breathe. Guilliman shot him a look of burning calculation. You fought them before. They are not ships, Vader replied. They are guilt. Outside, the void flared white. The specters took form. Star destroyers carved from nightmare, their lines warped, their hulls bleeding with molten fractures. But as the light grew, I saw them for what they were not, no crew, no signal, no life. Their surfaces were mirrors of his sins, the echoes of his command rebelling against time. The fleet of the dead, he whispered. Mine. Then the first beam struck. The Courage Invictus answered instantly, its golden lances cutting across the blackness like divine wrath. The phantom ships disintegrated, but in silence. No explosion, no debris, just dissolution like illusions erased by understanding. Yet for every one that vanished, two more emerged. They came in formations too precise to be random, too familiar to be coincidence. They're following old orders, Vader said. His voice was quieter now, almost human. Even in death they obey. Guilliman studied him, then turned to his command staff. We strike at the source. Find the controlling vessel. Vader shook his head. You cannot kill what was never alive. Then we end the illusion, Guilliman replied. As we've done since the heresy. The two warriors stood side by side. One golden, one black, both radiating an authority that made lesser men tremble. Guilliman raised his hand toward the bridge helm. Bring us within range. Prepare to fire. Vader stepped forward, the red blade finally igniting, humming with a restrained hunger. No, he said. I will go. Varro's voice cracked through the static. You will what? You cannot leave this ship. The void will, but he was already gone. One heartbeat he stood before us, the next. The air folded around him like a closing wound. Through the viewing glass I saw him. An ember moving through space without protection, his cape tearing like shadow in solar wind, his crimson weapon trailing a thin thread of light behind him. He landed upon the lead phantom ship as though gravity itself had conspired to allow him. The hull beneath his boots rippled, not metal but the memory of it. He moved forward, blade carving a molten path, cutting through apparitions that screamed in the language of ghosts. Each one wore armor shaped like his own but distorted, reflections of what he could have been, what he once commanded. They reached for him, calling him Lord, Father, Savior, Monster. On the bridge, Guilliman watched without expression, but his hands tightened on the command throne, the glow of psychic restraint around him brightening with every second. This is not battle, he murmured. It is penance. Then why do they fight? I asked before realizing the blasphemy of interrupting a demigod. Guilliman's eyes never left the scene. Because guilt and love share the same face. In the void, Vader pressed deeper into the heart of the phantom fleet. His breathing grew faster, louder. Every fallen reflection dissolved into sparks, feeding the growing storm of red light around him. The airless silence of space could not contain it. The hum of his weapon became a choir, the rhythm of his respirator a heartbeat for an entire dead armada. Then he reached the core. It was not an engine room, not a throne, but a void space filled with light and ash. There, waiting for him, stood another figure, taller, cloaked, faceless, wielding a blade of molten gold. Its armor was pure reflection. His own silhouette stared back at him. The respirator faltered. I killed you, he said. The reflection tilted its head. You did? Then why are you here? To remind you that death is not the end of guilt. The two lightsabers ignited together, red and gold, sound meeting silence. Their clash lit the void like a sunrise seen through blood. Each strike was an argument between absolution and damnation, and neither could win. Gilliman watched the readings spike into chaos. The Mechanicus data saints fainted from overload. Emperor preserve us, Vero whispered. Gilliman rose. No, the Emperor watches, the golden figure faltered. Vader drove his blade forward, cutting through illusion, through memory. The light exploded outward in a silent scream that shook the stars. On the Canticle's bridge, the Phantom fleet began to collapse, folding in on itself like a dying idea. He stood alone amid the ruin, his blade dimming. For the first time, he seemed small, just a man, scarred, breathing through a machine that no longer wanted to keep him alive. His voice reached us across the Vox, fragile and raw. It's done, Gilliman exhaled, lowering his sword. You destroyed them? No, Vader said. I forgave them. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. The Phantom fleet disintegrated completely, their last traces drifting into the warp like burnt scripture. The void was quiet again. The Canticle's systems stabilized, though many refused to record what they had seen, as if ashamed of their own witnessing. Gilliman turned to Vero. You will record this, he said. Not as fact, but as warning. There are truths too large for doctrine. Then he looked once more at the man in black still standing alone among the stars. Come back aboard, he said, but the figure did not move. His voice was faint now, carried by the last strength of his respirator. Your war is not mine. Tell your father. I understand. And with that his crimson light went out. The sensors lost him. No teleport trace, no energy signature, nothing. Just the void, endless and patient. Gilliman stared into it a long time before speaking again. Faith and reason both fail in the face of such men, he said softly. May the Emperor have mercy on him, if mercy still exists. The canticle of glass drifted in silence, lit only by the fading glow of distant stars. The canticle of glass returned to the Imperium like a confession scrawled across a holy text in blood. Our astropaths screamed for 7 hours when they tried to describe what had happened, and when the words finally reached Mars, the signal was fragmented, warped by the sheer weight of what it carried. What does one report to gods made of logic and pride? That a being from beyond the stars had walked their decks, spoken to their machines, and survived the gaze of a Primarch? That he had fought his own ghost in the dark and vanished like a prayer unremembered? Even the Mechanicus has limits to what it can catalog without losing faith in the idea of order itself. When we docked within the red shadow of Olympus Mons, the Forge priests came to greet us not with hymns but with silence. The ship was quarantined, sanctified, and stripped bare. Data spirits were exorcised. Servitors purged. We were sequestered into separate vaults for questioning. I saw Magos Varo only once during the entire ordeal, through a barrier of glass thick enough to drown sound. He looked older, if age can touch steel, and spoke with his eyes alone. Remember what you saw, but not what you know. I didn't understand then. They called it the Inquiry of the Obsidian Knight. The highest tiers of the priesthood gathered in the Martian Synod, joined by a contingent from the Adeptus Custodes, golden statues of living judgment whose presence alone turned the air into ritual. Among them stood Lord Custodian Laertes Morn, a figure carved from silence. He did not speak for hours. He simply watched us. Every movement, every blink recorded, weighed, categorized. When he finally spoke, his voice was a calm that silenced thought. You have encountered a being not of this galaxy, he said. Describe him. I began with what I knew, height, armor composition, weapon resonance, the rhythm of his breathing. But halfway through, I felt the air change. The custodian's expression remained still, but I could sense judgment tightening around me like an invisible gauntlet. You are certain, he said, that this entity was not Warpborne? No, I replied, because anything else would have been a lie. He carried no taint. His presence repelled the immaterium. The warp feared him. A murmur rippled through the synod. Heresy, some whispered. Impossible, said others. Laertes Morn raised a hand. Describe the power he wielded. I searched for words. It was intention. His will bent matter, not like a psyker. It was precise. He did not command energy, he convinced it. That was when the custodian turned his gaze fully upon me. You speak of persuasion as power. That is how gods rule. I wanted to protest, but the Magi were already debating in binary. Some claimed he was a pre-imperial construct, perhaps an AI hybrid from the dark age of technology, a human-mind symbiosis preserved through millennia. Others argued he was a demonic reflection sent to test the Emperor's faith. A few whispered the most dangerous thought of all, that he might have been a warning. The debate raged for 12 days. The Mechanicus craved patterns. The ecclesiarchy demanded narrative. Between them lay the impossible truth that refused to fit either. They dissected every data fragment we brought back. The readings from the plasma heart, the psychic resonance of the Primarchs' duel, even the degradation of our ship's metal where his boots had touched. All of it suggested not intrusion but dialogue. It was during the fourth night that I was summoned to a private audience with Magos Varro. He had been permitted to return to his quarters. Though quarters was a generous word for a chamber carved from steel and paranoia. He was surrounded by data slates, hundreds of them, each carrying a piece of forbidden transcription. He greeted me without looking up. They will erase this, he said. I didn't need to ask what he meant. The custodes will order it sealed under Adeptus Obscurus classification. It will become liturgy, not record. A spirit tested the faith of Mars, they will say. Or a fragment of the Omnissiah manifested to remind us of our duties. Nothing else will survive. Isn't that safer? I asked. He finally turned to face me. His mechanical eyes glowed faintly red in the half-light. Safe, he said, is what we call ignorance when it keeps us warm. He reached for one of the slates and handed it to me. Read. The text was a series of logs recovered from the ship's machine spirit after the event. Most were corrupted, looping fragments of static and prayer, but one line repeated throughout, carved into the data like a signature. He speaks to us in the tongue of loss. I looked up, unsure. Varro nodded. The ship remembers him. The canticle spirit has taken his rhythm. Its heart still breathes in sync with his. My blood went cold. Magos. You mean it still hears him? Varro smiled, a small bitter thing. No, adept. It waits for him. Days passed. The synod ended. The custodes gave their judgment. The being known as the Obsidian Knight was to be classified non-manifest, recorded as a machine ghost anomaly, neither alive nor divine, but a distortion of the warp made coherent by human perception. All related data was to be erased, all witnesses reassigned to distant duties across the segmentum. The Imperium, Lord Morn said before departing, endures through forgetting. I should have accepted that mercy. I didn't. The night before my reassignment, I returned to the Canticle of Glass. It was docked beneath the red dust storms of the lower forges, stripped bare of weapons, its decks silent as a tomb. Yet as I stepped into the sanctum, the air hummed faintly, the same cadence I had once heard in the void. Inhale. Exhale. The plasma heart still glowed, but its color had changed again. Not the Emperor's white, not the Omnissiah's blue. It pulsed in deep crimson. I approached it slowly. You remember him, I whispered. The ship answered. Not in sound, but through the motion of its light. The glow flared, dimmed, flared again, in rhythm. Long, short, long, short. The same breath. And then faintly through the vox relay long dead to human use came a voice, distorted, distant, half-swallowed by static. The machine and the man are one. You only fear what you might become. I staggered back, every servo in my suit locking in reflex. The voice was gone, but the rhythm remained. I wanted to believe it was an echo, a residual trace. But I knew better. The ship was not haunted, it was listening. Later I learned that other forges reported similar disturbances. Minor at first. Unregistered harmonics. Data patterns that mimicked respiration. Servitors humming in rhythm with unseen cadence. A new prayer spreading through the circuits like contagion. They began to call it the breath of the machine. Some dismissed it as superstition. Others built shrines to it. And deep within the forbidden archives beneath Mars, those vaults sealed even from the Fabricator General, a handful of magi began to whisper of a second Omnissiah. Not the Emperor, not the machine god of Terra and Mars, but something between them. A reconciler. A being who walked as both. They said he would return when the engines of the Imperium forgot how to serve, and the men who worshipped them forgot how to dream. And when he did, the galaxy itself would have to remember how to breathe again. Centuries passed before anyone spoke his name again. By then, the truth had already died, buried under layers of liturgy and reinterpreted scripture. The ecclesiarchy turned the event into sermon. The mechanicus turned it into theorem, and both agreed to forget that a man in black armor once walked among them. But faith is a poor custodian of silence. Legends, like embers, refuse to die when the wind of fear stirs them. They called him the shadow of the throne. No longer Hirtek, no longer outsider, but a parable recited in the low hives and whispered in the forge halls of Mars when the plasma fires burned too low. The story always began the same way. A figure born of lightless stars, armored in sorrow, who came to test the Emperor's dominion. In some versions, he sent the Primarch Guilliman to destroy the heretic. In others, the Emperor himself rose from the golden throne, a god roused by the echo of something he once was. The ending changed with every telling. Some said the stranger was obliterated by divine radiance. Others swore he knelt before the throne and vanished in absolution. A few, too few, claimed he walked away unchanged, a scar on the Imperium's memory that refused to heal. I read those accounts centuries later, in the dust-clogged vaults beneath the cathedral of the Omnissiah's voice. I was no longer Cael Veritas, the young adept who had trembled in the dark beside gods. Time had carved new names into me: Inquisitor, Heretic, Redeemed. My body was more machine than flesh, but my mind still remembered the sound of that breathing. It had haunted my augmetic dreams, a rhythm no prayer could drown out. I was not alone in remembering. Across the Imperium, fragments of his legend had mutated into cults of forbidden devotion. They worshipped not his power, but his remorse. They called themselves the Disciples of the Last Breath. I found one such sect on the shrine world of Thelasar, hidden beneath the bones of a burned manufactorum. Their leader, an old priest with eyes replaced by bronze lenses, welcomed me with the humility of one who expected death. "We do not defy the Emperor," he said, hands clasped over a chest that no longer beat. "We only honor the one who tried to understand him." They led me to their altar, a relic built from scavenged mechanicus machinery and imperial scripture. At its heart burned a single flickering light, red and soft as a dying ember. Beneath it hung a mask, blackened, broken, yet unmistakable. The breath caught in my throat. "Where did you find this?" The priest bowed his head. It was unearthed in the ruins of Mars, beneath a vault sealed by the fabricator general himself. The data seal bore your old sigil. My knees weakened. I approached the relic and felt the air shift. The vox static in my ear implant pulsed once, then twice. Long, short. I reached out and the lights went out. Darkness fell like a veil. The red ember flared, brighter now, painting the walls in shadow. And then the sound came again, soft, slow, familiar. The same mechanical breath that had filled the sanctum of the canticle of glass. The priest and his followers fell to their knees, whispering in awe. I could not move. The air trembled and the light condensed into shape, a faint outline, tall, cloaked, faceless. Not flesh, not spirit, only presence. The voice that spoke was quieter than I remembered, yet sharper, clearer, as if time itself had been sanded away. "You still seek meaning in what you do not understand. Who are you?" I asked, though I already knew. Once I was the hand that enforced order. Now I am the echo that questions it. "You died," I said. "So did he," came the reply. "But gods do not stay dead. They become their own shadows." The figure turned toward the red flame, and for a moment I saw him as he had been. Armored, scarred, the faint reflection of something divine in his ruin. "The Emperor remembers me," he said. In his endless dreaming, he sees what he could have been had he allowed himself to fall. I dared to step closer. "You fought him." "No," he said. "I warned him." He reached toward the light and the flame leapt higher, revealing the walls now inscribed with sigils I had never seen. Half mechanicus logic, half imperial scripture, the two languages woven into harmony. "The machine and the faith were never enemies," he said. "They are the same longing, the need to believe that the universe listens." The priest beside me sobbed openly. "Then you are the Omnissiah reborn." The figure turned and the red lenses of his helm glowed faintly once more. "No," he said. The Omnissiah was the man who tried to end the war between flesh and steel. I'm what remains when both sides lose. The words sank into me like iron through water. He stepped forward, the shadow solidifying for a heartbeat. I felt heat radiate from him. Not the warmth of fire, but the ache of memory made physical. Your Emperor's light is fading, he said. His throne devours him one breath at a time. The galaxy decays around his silence. What should we do? I asked, my voice breaking through reverence and terror alike. He regarded me for a long moment. Then softly, remember how to breathe. And with that, the light died. The followers cried out. The red flame flickered back to its former dim glow. The shadow was gone. Only the mask remained, resting where it had always been, lifeless, cold, yet impossibly heavy with meaning. I fell to my knees beside it. The priest whispered a prayer I half recognized, a merging of Mechanicus and ecclesiarchy liturgy. Through faith, function. I looked up and saw the symbol above the altar had changed. The double-headed Aquila had fractured. Its twin faces turned away from one another, and between them a small, luminous line of red light. A breath. When I returned to Terra years later, the High Lords were already preaching a new doctrine. They called it the Liturgy of Integration. The ecclesiarchy claimed it came from a recovered vision of the Emperor himself, a message of reconciliation between the machine and the man. Mars called it blasphemy. The schism that followed split the Imperium in thought, if not yet in war. But the priests of Thelasar, the forgotten, the ones who had seen the mask, they whispered the truth that the others would not name, that the Emperor's shadow had walked again, and that the breath of that machine still echoed in the heart of the throne. Sometimes, when the void storms quiet, the vox across the segmentum picks up a faint rhythm beneath the static. Long, short, long, short. Those who serve the machine god say it's interference. The ecclesiarchs say it's heresy. But the ones who remember, the ones who saw the red light burn where no star shone, say it's something else. A reminder that even gods once were men, and that every empire, no matter how divine, is only one breath away from remembrance. The record ends there, sealed in the archives of the Inquisition as Apocrypha Obscuris, the Shadow Thesis. No author claimed it. Some say the file was a fabrication, a digital ghost constructed from corrupted Mechanicus data. Others whisper it was dictated by a voice over an encrypted vox, its tone mechanical, deliberate, filled with the rhythm of breath. If you have heard that rhythm, you know the truth. The war between faith and machine never ended. It only learned to breathe in silence.